Hello, my name's Sabrina Wayneth and I'm a psychotherapist. This is a video about EMDR, which stands for Eye Movement Desensitization and Reprocessing, which is a form of therapy that's increasingly the treatment of choice for dealing with trauma. And trauma is really at the root of most disorders, obviously something like post-traumatic stress disorder, but it's also sort of at the root of many anxieties, phobias, panic attacks, eating disorders, addictions, just because trauma is really sort of unprocessed, distressing life events. And it's something that EMDR is very effective at targeting and healing in a very short space of time. So I thought the easiest way of introducing you to EMDR would actually be to take you through a session so you can get a sense of what's actually involved in EMDR. So the first part of an EMDR session is all about identifying your most distressing memories, and you might actually be asked to write down your top 10 distressing memories or life events, which is an interesting exercise in itself, because so many of us are wired to avoid, forget, push under the carpet any kind of painful memory or any kind of discomfort. Which EMDR just doesn't allow, and it's very direct in asking for that information, and it's very specific. So for each memory you'd be asked to identify the worst moment of that memory or the image that sort of symbolizes the worst part of it. So right from the beginning you're nearly lasering into the trauma in a very sort of nearly scientific, sort of structured way. That's very different to regular talk therapy, where a client might be in therapy for months or years and never actually venture into those distressing memories just because it feels too uncomfortable or a little bit too scary. EMDR just sort of goes straight for it, and those memories are actually called targets in EMDR, which I think is sort of an apt name. And the second part is all about working with the thoughts associated with those traumatic memories. So once you've identified the traumatic memories and that worst image or worst part of the trauma, you actually start to look at the thoughts that accompanied the traumatic memory. And very often there's a negative thought or a negative self-belief. So something like, I'm not good enough, I'm a failure, I'm unlovable, I should have done more, I'm not safe, I'm ugly, whatever it happens to be. That's a sort of negative self-belief that sort of goes hand in hand with that traumatic memory. And once you've noted that, you also want to see what's your preferred thought, as in what would you prefer to think about yourself. And that might be something like, I do have value, I am attractive, I'm doing what I can, or I'm doing my best. Some preferred thought that feels more adaptive. And what's interesting, this is obviously the cognitive therapy part of EMDR, is at the beginning of the session, that preferred thought, whether it's I'm lovable, I'm good enough, often doesn't feel that true to the client, and it's actually measured on a scale of 1 to 7, 1 being completely false and 7 being completely true. And as the session progresses, you can actually see that that preferred thought starts to gain more ground and feels more and more believable to the client, and you can actually track that with the numbers. And what's interesting as well, even though you're just working on one core memory or trauma, those self-beliefs very, very often, sort of once you shift them with your core memories, they actually tend to sort of infiltrate into the rest of your life. So suddenly the belief, I have value, feels more true in the whole of your life, not just when you think about that particular trauma or incident. So the third part of EMDR is all about tracking the physical sensations and feelings in the body. So as in exposure therapy, when you're asked to focus on the traumatic memory or image, you're likely to feel more physical sensations or emotions show up in the body. which is really a key part of healing trauma. You do actually, sort of like with somatic therapy, have to pay attention to the body and sort of open and allow those feelings to cycle through. And EMDR actually sort of asks you to track where are you feeling those emotions in the body. Is it the stomach, the chest? How strongly are you feeling them on a scale of 0 to 10? 10 being the highest distress possible. And what's interesting, in a session you can actually sort of see those numbers decrease as the session progresses, meaning your distress is going down. And what I think is lovely about EMDR is that you've actually got a tangible tool which makes feeling those physical sensations much more bearable. And that tangible tool comes in the form of the bilateral stimulation, or the eye movements. So the key part of EMDR is actually in the eye movements, or the bilateral stimulation. And you'd actually sort of follow your therapist's fingers. It would work something like that. But it happens very, very fast. And you're just following with your eyes very, very fast, which actually sort of mimics the eye movements in rapid eye movement REM sleep, which is known to be sort of part of the healing mechanism of the mind. That usually happens during sleep. So that movement from left brain to right brain hemisphere helps process the emotion and the trauma. And if you prefer to have your eyes closed, then you wouldn't do the eye movements. You'd use something like this, which is a little machine with pulses, which I don't know if you can hear them, but they kind of buzz. And you'd actually hold them in each hand, and it does the same. It's that bilateral stimulation, or some people prefer audio, so you'd actually have alternating audio tones. But it's the most fantastic tool to actually help you process what some part of you feels isn't processable or feelable, and it actually helps you work through that until the image or memory really is something that you can remember relatively neutrally, rather than sort of re-experience with lots of trauma or lots of emotion that feels overwhelming. So I hope that's given you a little bit of insight into EMDR and what an EMDR session might look like, and why it's really the key sort of therapy when it comes to healing trauma. If you want to read more, I've written a blog about it on my website, sabrinaweymouth.com. Do check that out, and do feel free to get in touch if you've got any questions. Thanks so much for watching.